Hello and welcome to Paul Taylor Glass Lessons. Today I'm going to be showing you how I make my flower implosion pendants. This is something that I normally, if I'm teaching a beginner lesson, this is the first pendant I like to teach because it shows beginner glass artists how to manipulate clear and colored glass and how to do a basic implosion. But I'm going to be showing a little bit more advanced and give you a basic idea of how I do my sculpted petals and to get the symmetrical shape of a flower. So I'm going to be making a medium-sized flower implosion pendant using a few different colors. So let me get the camera set up and I'll show you the materials and tools we'll be working with. Yep, that looks good. All right, so to make this piece, I'm going to be using a few colors. I'll be using Blue Thunder from North Star Glass, and I'll be using this for the little center dots in the middle of the flower. And then I'll be using Blue Moon for the petals of the flower. And then as a backing color, I'm just going to use regular cobalt blue. And this piece is going to be built using a 16mm clear rod. I'm going to use this rod as a handle and melt the end and make the pendant on the end, but you can always use a thinner gauge handle with a small piece of 16mm attached. It all depends on what you're comfortable with. I'm totally fine using a big heavy rod, but I know a lot of people, especially if you're beginning out, it's hard to keep a heavy rod centered, so you may want to use a thin diameter rod with a small piece of 16mm attached. If you're doing that, I'd attach about 3 inches. You're only going to be using about 1.5 inches, but you want to have enough extra clear. So let me get this set up here. The tools we're going to use, we're going to be using a graphite pad, 2 different graphite paddles, mainly just one to flatten down, but I'll use this one to kind of keep it on center if I need. I'm going to be using a small sculpting knife, and I'll be using my graphite reamer just to make sure that the loop is round once the pendant's made. All right, and I'm going to be using just small bits of 7mm clear as handles at different points. Let me get that prepped. All right, let's fire up the kiln, fire up the torch and get this going. So I like to start with a large flame. I'll use the 16mm rod. Since it's got a cut end, I'm going to heat the end, pinch it with tweezers and tear it off. If you end up just using this kind of factory cut flat end, it's going to get bubbles along the rim. So you're just going to want to heat it up and tear it off. Just with the tweezers, tearing off that little bit of scuzzy glass. Now I'm just going to heat up about maybe 2 inches or so and get it into a nice hot round gather. And once it's even and even size, even shape, and the heat is even throughout the entire piece, I'm going to flatten it on my paddle. And depending on how large you want to go with this, you can, the sky's the limit. As big as you're comfortable working with, you can make a large marble or paperweight using the same technique. And it all depends on how big your starting clear blank is. So with this, it's just going to be a medium-sized pendant. Now that I have a nice, even, hot, round gather, I'm going to flatten it straight up and down on the paddle here. Just making sure to press straight down. You don't want to lean in one direction or another. You want to keep it a nice flat disc. You can see right there, the end is nice and flat, nice and even. I'm going to give this a few seconds to cool down. And I'm just going to throw it in the kiln, and then I'm going to pull a few stringers from these rods here. And it doesn't matter what order you do it in. In a perfect world, I would have pulled these stringers first and gone right into making it, but I just want to show you all the different prep steps. So now that I have this blank ready and it's started to cool down, I'm going to throw it in the kiln, and then we'll start pulling out some stringers from this one color here. All right, I'm going to take this Blue Moon and just rip this label off best I can, since we got a little short right here. Yeah, still a little paper left, but it'll burn off in the flame. I'm just going to attach it to a handle. Make sure it's on center. And I'm going to heat up about 1 inch of it. Let me just tear off this end real quick, make sure it's a nice little blank I'm working with. Going to heat up about 1 inch of it, get it nice and hot, and then I'm going to tack on this little 7mm handle, take it out of the flame, and give it a gentle stretch and pull it into a stringer. And I'll use this stringer to draw on the petals of the flower. Touch it to a handle, take it out of the flame, and then just give it a gentle stretch. Drop down to a small flame and just tear it off. Now I'm left with a nice little stringer of this Blue Moon. I'll set this aside and I'll move on to this Blue Thunder, and I'm just gonna preheat the tip of it and pull it into a fine point. I don't need to pull a full stringer, but I'm gonna get a nice point because I'm going to be doing a pattern of dots for the center of the flower. So I'll set that aside. This pattern of dots I'm gonna start by doing one center dot in the middle of the flat disc. And then I'm gonna do one dot above it, or just, one dot right next to it, and then one dot opposite of it. Let me draw a little, see if I can, there we go. So as far as getting the spacing down, I do one dot in the center. Let's say this here is, there we go. I got one dot in the center. I do another dot on one side here. Opposite to that, I do the next dot. So I have a line of 3 with the center dot centered in the piece. Now on either side, I'll do 2 dots. So once I have this, I will do a dot and a dot, and then I'll go to the other side and do a dot and a dot. And I'll be left with a pattern of 6 dots around one center dot, 7 dots total. All right, let me grab that disc from the kiln. Actually, here, let me get this little point prepped, and then I'll grab the disc from the kiln and we'll start working. Right now I have a nice fine little point on the end of this rod ready to apply some small dots. So let me grab that clear disc and we'll start doing that center pattern. Whenever you grab anything from the kiln, wipe it off. You can use your Kevlar gloves. I like using a piece of cardboard or a magic card, whatever, just something to wipe that kiln dust off. So now I'm gonna start by doing that just one center dot. I'm gonna turn my flame down to a very small flame. And as best I can, eyeballing it out to a small dot in the very center. Now I'll do one dot next to it. And one dot opposite. So now I have a line of 3. And now I'll pick a side and I'll do 2 dots. And switch to the other side and do 2 dots. Now I have a circle, 6 dots around one center dot. Now I'm gonna switch over to the stringer of Blue Moon, and I'm gonna draw 5 bands circling this cluster of dots. So you'll see, I'll show you in a second what that looks like. Actually, I'm going to do 6. Keep up with the symmetry. I think I got the room for it. You can do 5, 6, 4, 7. It really doesn't matter how many petals you do on your flower. But you can see right here, there are 5 lines going around those dots. What I'm now going to do is, in a small flame, individually heat each of those lines and use this sculpting knife to press an indent down the center of each line, like that. So we'll go one at a time and just score. Once it's nice and hot, you want to make sure that whole little band of color is hot, and just straight down in one motion. Kind of slipped. Try again. Just press down in the center and score a line, almost as if you're dividing that line into 2. Or you're dividing that band into 2. And that little score mark is going to end up imploding as a point, making this end up looking like a flower petal. Just go around, heat them individually, and press them in. Now you can see the center of each of them has had a line scored down. Now what I'm going to do, at this point you can either do another band of lines and score them, or you can do dots, or you can leave it as is. I'm going to go back to the Blue Thunder, and I'm just going to do one small dot between each of the lines here. So those lines around the outside border, I'm going to do a small dot, kind of creating a little border of 6 dots. All right. I'm going to turn up to a bigger flame, but now you can see I have 6 small dots around the border, kind of between each line, but just outside. Now that I have this pattern drawn on, it's time to implode. To implode, we want to heat the entire flat bottom and the side and keep the piece angled pointed down. So in the elbow up position where the piece is angled pointed down. And focus your heat on the front of it and the side. And after, depending on your torch, after a minute or after 5 minutes, you'll notice the clear glass will kind of start dripping down while the color is a little bit stiffer and it appears to get pulled up, imploded within. It's all about making sure you're at the right angle and making sure you're heating the entire face and the entire side. Just keep the piece spinning and keep it at this angle. And make sure your heat is applied evenly throughout the entire front and side, and it will start to implode on you. I can see right now it's just beginning to implode. Should be another 30 seconds to a minute, and it will be a nice looking flower that we can start working on the back. You'll notice that your surface dots on the back are going to be getting smaller and smaller, and that's good. You want that. The color's getting pulled up into the clear. I'm just keeping it at that angle and heating just the end right now. We are mostly imploded. I'm now going to change to horizontal and heat the entire thing and let it kind of become round again. And I'm going to gently use this paddle just to flatten the bottom. And when I say gently, I mean very gently. I'm just going to slightly press it to get it flat, but I don't want to really distort the implosion. So I'm just going to very gingerly, very gently flatten the bottom. really hard to see at this point. We'll give it a few seconds, cool down, and hopefully you'll get a better view of what's going on. Our next step is to get a nice hot gather of that cobalt blue, attach it on the end here on the back, get it ripping hot, and then flatten it with the paddle, melt that in, and we'll have a nice backing to this flower. And then we can remove it from this handle, clean up the lens, attach a handle on the bottom, and then create the loop on the top. So now that it's cooled down, let's see if you can kind of get a better view of what's going on there. You can see those petals and the center dots. All right, I think that's the best view I can give you, and that's how it's looking from the bottom. So now I'm going to grab, let's see here, this rod of cobalt blue. Gonna get a nice gather, maybe about an inch, nice and ripping hot, and I'll attach it to the back, remove the blue handle, and then get that blue nice and hot and give it a gentle flatten to spread it across the back evenly. I just want to make sure to focus my heat on the blue at this point because I don't want to distort any of this implosion right now. Don't want to get this hot, don't want to manipulate it. So now I'm attaching that blue on the back, make sure it's even, and I'll tear off this rod. And we'll set that aside because we'll use that to build the loop. So now I'm going to focus my heat just on that blue, trying not to heat up the clear. And once I have an even heat, I'm going to use the paddle here to gently press it in and make sure it spreads evenly across the back. So you can see right here, got a nice lump of blue on the back, which is glowing right now. Gonna get that hot, and just one motion with the paddle, trying to keep it on center, just press down. And there we have a nice flattened disc of cobalt on the back, and we're gonna focus our heat just on the back and try to melt the seam between the clear and the cobalt nice and smooth. We're almost there. Once the seam gets melted in nice, I'm just gonna go back with the paddle and gently re-flatten because it starts to round out the more you really focus your heat on the end. And we were just about there, and now I'm just gonna, while I have the heat, just gonna go in and gently flatten the bottom. Just don't wanna go in too forceful with the paddle because we don't wanna manipulate the flower. So now I'm gonna give it a few seconds to cool off. And I'm going to attach a handle on the back of the flattened end, what'll be the back of the pendant. I'm going to attach a handle, and then in a small flame, I'll remove the rest of this clear 16 mil rod, and we'll just flame polish the lens nice and smooth. So actually, I'm going to go, let me find an appropriate handle. Perfect. Gonna make sure I got a nice even straight attachment. Make sure it's on center, and now in the small flame, just gonna remove this clear rod and flame polish the lens so we get a nice even magnification. So you can use most colors to make these, but transparent colors don't tend to look as nice because they kind of bleed out and don't give you the same effect. So try sticking to opaque colors. A lot of just the bright rainbow colors, crayon colors work great. With this, I like to use the fuming colors like the Blue Moon and the Blue Thunder because they remind me of how succulents have those nice, like juicy, thick flowers. So for these, I like that succulent desert flower look, so I go for those fumy blues. So as you see, we've got this nice torn off Hershey Kiss going. I'm gonna now, in a small flame, tear off this excess glass, and we're just gonna melt it nice and smooth. But you can kind of see how the flower's starting to show itself. But yeah, if you're going for like daffodils or, you know, something, just use any sort of opaque, just non-transparent color. The new neocads, the yellows, the reds, the oranges, they all look great. But if you're going for that like desert succulent look, I really like how Blue Moon, Blue Lightning, Blue Thunder, Alaska Night, the list goes on. A lot of the caramel colors get a nice blue stripe when encased. When I say caramel colors, I like the butterscotch, caramel, silver strike, silver beach, silver bullet, tan silver creek, all those fun colors. So, got that nice and rounded out and smooth on the front, still glowing, ripping hot. Gonna give this a few seconds to cool, and then we'll attach a handle coming off where we want the bottom to be. So I like to look straight down into it and see if it's leaning in one direction or another. It's not uncommon for the Implosion to kind of lean in one direction. And I like, if I notice that there's a lean, I like to have it lean up. And by that I mean, wherever the lean is, like if it's leaning, let's say to the left, I'm attaching the handle on the right. That way the finished pendant looks like it's coming up, because people are gonna be looking down at it if it's being worn. So if it's kind of coming up at them, it adds a better effect. On this one, it's kind of centered pretty nice. It really doesn't have one direction or another. The center pedals kind of lean in one direction, but we'll see. We'll see what I can tack on here and make look nice. So I'm just going to use this small rod with 7mm as a handle. Let's say, I think right there will do. I'm just going to attach a handle on what I want the bottom to be. Remove that handle off the back. Make sure it's on center, and then I'll just flame polish the small blemish left by the handle that we just removed. And there you go, that's gone. Now we're gonna grab our cobalt blue rod that we set aside, and I'm gonna heat up about 1/2 inch of it, and I'm gonna add a small gather to the top, which is gonna end up turning into our loop in a few minutes. So I'm gonna start by just heating about a 1/2 inch of the end of this cobalt rod, and once the heat is even throughout it, I'm gonna tack it right onto the top of the pendant. So just tack it on, make sure it's even, and now we'll move that heat up about 1/2 inch on the rod here, and tear it off. Get a little pedal motion. So now we're left with a small gather, about 1/2 inch of a rod coming off the end of the pendant here. I'm gonna focus my heat on where the two meet. I'm gonna melt the connection between that little rod and the pendant, 100% perfect. In a tiny flame, I'm just gonna keep it spinning and focus that heat, making sure these two pieces of glass become one. All right, now that the connection is nice and clean, I'm gonna heat up the entire blue stump, blue gather. I'm getting it nice and hot, and I like to keep it angled pointing down, just to kind of keep it on center. Make sure I get all sides nice and evenly hot. I'll show you how I bend my loops. I'm gonna take it out of the flame, let it fall on center, then I'll turn it up. I'm gonna pinch the top here, give it a little stretch, and bend it back. Now, while it's still hot, I can make sure it's straight, kind of press it down a little bit. So you can see we have the start of a loop. They're not connected at the back. So our next step is in a small flame. We're just gonna apply heat to where the back of the pendant meets the loop. Just this connection, we're gonna melt this connection in perfectly smooth. Get those two pieces of glass to become one. And in this case, I'm gonna heat up that back of the loop there and use this tool to kind of press it flat, just so we have a nice connection to melt in. You wanna make sure to heat all sides of that connection, including the inside of the loop. And after a few minutes, you'll get it melted in perfectly even. Now focus more heat on the inside. Make sure that inside connection is done well. All right, now it's connected on both ends of the loop, but the loop is kind of wonky looking. So we're gonna heat up, we're gonna turn our flame up to a little bit more bushy, a little bit larger, more bushy, more propane, and we're gonna get it just a soaking heat through that entire loop. And we're gonna use our graphite reamer to make it nice and round. Once the heat is even through the entire loop, it should only take maybe 20 seconds of heat. We're gonna go on one side, press the reamer in and kind of spin it, and then we're gonna switch to the other side, press the reamer in and spin it, and go back and forth a few times to make sure it's on center. So press it in and spin, turn it, press it in and spin, turn it, press it in and spin. Make sure it's on center, and look at that. Nice and perfectly round hole on a nice, thick, well-attached loop. Pretty happy with this one. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let the loop cool off, and I'm gonna grab my handy dandy tweezers here. Just flash them in the flame for 2-3 seconds just so they're not cold and don't shock the glass. And I'm gonna grab the loop, or grab the pendant by the loop, just pinch it, and just tap off that handle on the bottom. And now in a small flame, clean up any little marks left by your handle. I have a tiny little lump that was left, so I'm just gonna heat it, tear it off, and now I'll melt the bottom smooth. It'll just take a second or two. And once I'm happy with the heat, keep that part angled, pointed up, so it kind of rounds out. Let it cool down. And I think that looks really good. Gonna have to give this a few more seconds. Let me see if I can get in better light here. Where's the best light here? Here you go. But you can see those outer petals have a nice point on the end of each of them, and the inner dots still remain round. And you can do alternating colors, you can do intricate color patterns, and you can do many different bands as far as petals. With this, it's just one outer ring of petals, but if you want to use a large blank, you can do 2, 3, 4, 5, the sky's the limit. So this is just a basic flower, my version of a succulent. So hope you like that. I'm gonna throw it in the kiln, and we'll get some better views of this tomorrow once it's nice and cool. So with any pendants, you really want to make sure your loop is really well attached. You want to make sure that connection is 100% perfect. You don't want to think of your pendant as two pieces of glass put together, the main cab and the loop. You want it to be one piece of glass. So make sure you focus your heat on those connections, get them melted in perfectly. And as you saw, it just takes a few extra seconds of focusing that heat. And then when it comes down to the final shaping, just a quick back and forth with your reamer and you'll get a nice even loop. And that is essential for getting a pendant to be of the highest quality. I've seen incredibly worked cabs that have kind of janky loops, and it throws everything off. So focus on your bails, your loops, whatever you want to call them. Focus with a small hot flame on those connections, and when you want to go to the final shaping, hit it with a high bushy flame. Make sure the heat is even throughout the entire bail before you go in and shape it. If it's hotter in one area, if it's thinner in one area, it's gonna wanna get more, it's gonna manipulate more with the reamer. So make sure your heat and thickness is even throughout the entire loop and you'll get a nice even bail. So as always, if you have any questions, shoot me a DM on Instagram. I am always happy to answer any questions you have about glass. And thank you so much for the support. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna be recording a bunch of videos this week so I can post them over the upcoming weeks. Because as many of you know, I'm moving right now, moving from Bowling Green, Ohio to Cleveland. So it's about 2 hours away, but my studio is still in Bowling Green and will be for the next 6 to 7 months. So I'm gonna be commuting, working on kind of a weird schedule, but yeah, over the next week or so, it's gonna be a lot of lessons being recorded so I can have that knowledge stored up for when I'm, busy commuting and busy doing life stuff. There will still be a plentiful supply of lesson videos. So again, thank you so much. If you have any suggestions of future lessons, shoot me a message of what you want to learn, and I'm happy to add it to the list, and I will definitely teach it to you. So look forward to seeing what you make. Look forward to seeing these flowers. Cheers.